Welcome to For the Love of Money Talk Show. I'm your host, EMELIO, KALMERA, and we're here at 98.1 Pearl FM. It's good to be back. I was out for 2 weeks vacationing off island. To be exact, I was in Orlando. Getting there was an experience. And the whole immigration setup to me was a disaster. So when people sometimes ask about the pre-clearance aspect, I wonder if it really will work as intended. I've avoided Miami to be exact, and went via Fort Lauderdale, thinking it would have been a bit better. Fort Lauderdale was not that better, to be honest with you, and so I don't want to go through that whole explanation. But I think my best bet would have been maybe to go via Puerto Rico, because I don't think Puerto Rico have the same setup like Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale is also using the machines, but the funniest thing, it took a while to get to the machines, so it was back in lines going. Even Americans had the problem as well. That was so strange to see. And then when you get to the machine, it takes your fingerprint, it snaps your picture, then you go back in the line again, back and forth until you get to the immigration officer. And when you finally get there, the immigration officer takes your fingerprint and snap your picture again. So okay, I just did that a while ago with the machine, so why I have to do it a second time anyhow? So I don't think the pre-clearance thing, no one has convinced me yet that it will work. I'm still waiting for someone to convince me of that, because what I think will happen is that the kept back time will be just transferred over here as opposed to into the United States. But nonetheless, I'm hoping somebody can one day convince me, and that would be a great something. I have not been in the United States in terms of layover there to have, for vacation a long time, to be honest. So, certain things have changed a lot in my view. One of the things I think that's changed, especially when you went to all the theme parks or whatever, you pay for parking now. So you know how long ago I have not been to the States, because back in the times I went, you never had to pay for parking. I think the cheapest parking that we encountered was $25, and then they had the premium parking. I call it premium, but it's have like a more expensive one. Is I think it's $30 or $35, where you park closer. No, it's $35 I think, where you park closer to the entrance, so you can get in and out easier and stuff like that. So them guys really know how to make money. It's become really a money racket. And Universal was my worst experience. In my opinion, so some people might differ, but Universal was my worst experience. But I really like the water parks. The water parks are pretty interesting, and so I did have a good time. I thought it was bittersweet because I didn't get to swim too much because of my hair, and there was another venture I wanted to do, which was like hang gliding, but in a wind tunnel. The foolish helmet couldn't fit over my head because of my locks. But then what I should have done, I should have researched if there was any persons that do locks in the area, which there were. After the fact, I found out that. So I could have actually loosened up my hair, do what I gotta do, go in the pool, swim and do whatever, and then go by her, leave her wash my hair and then do it over. But yeah, hindsight. So I probably might do that next time if I'm feeling up to going to the States. States is... even when I went to, because our luggage didn't get there, our luggage came 3 days after, so we had to end up going to Walmart to get some few stuff. And I was quite surprised though, the quality of the food in that particular Walmart, especially the fresh fruits and vegetables, was not that good. Sometimes we complain about it down here, but I was quite shocked to see that it was not that great in that particular Walmart that we went to. And today my core topic would be about food security. I'm going to get into some other stuff before I get into the food security aspect. Because when I got back here, I was going through, trying to catch up with some of the news and so forth. So I'll go through some of the stuff that I was reading that I found was very interesting, and before I get into the food security aspect. Once again, our website is www.pearlfmradio.sx. We also have the Facebook page, which is SXM 98.1 Pearl FM. So you can also watch us there as well. You can also watch us live in the studio by downloading the app, which I highly recommend you do. And so I think we also getting a new app to replace the one that we have now, which is very interesting. You should definitely try to get that app downloaded, because in the future we'll be doing some interesting things via that app. When I got back, I started to read the Daily Herald. I started reading the April 18th because I left on the 18th, so I didn't get a chance to catch up on any news. Of course, it was online, but it was almost out every day, so I didn't get a chance to do that either. I saw some nice auctions going on, and Mingo Civil Law Lottery. There's some auctions going on, so definitely try to check out those auctions, folks, because you might be able to get a better deal than the high prices that are available for real estate in general. I saw, for example, an auction that's being auctioned, properties being auctioned for $90,000. That's on the April 18th Daily Herald newspaper. You can find it on page number 45. So they have some auctions there as well, so you could definitely check that out. I don't think the date has arrived. Oh yeah, May 2nd. Some of them was May 2nd, so you probably missed that already. You missed out already. And then I read there's an announcement by government. They are issuing a bond, 2019 bond that will be due 2049. And one of the problems we have here, some people ask me, can we buy government bonds? Of course you can. The problem you have is you would have to go via a bank, but that bank would have to want to subscribe to this particular bond. The problem is most local banks do not subscribe because the interest rates on these bonds is very low in comparison to Holland. So when Holland is subscribing, in this case they mentioned the yield of April 8 for a 30-year loan was 0.69%. Because Holland have first right to subscribe to these bonds, and they will use the interest rates applicable in Holland, and those rates are really low. So most banks do not do that, because typically if you look at the yield that is mentioned in this article is the Daily Herald of April 18th on page 21. It tells about the bond issuance of government, St. Martin government, and they mentioned they mentioned the yield as of April 8th for a 30-year loan was 0.69%. When I went on the U.S. Treasury website to find out what their equivalent 30-year Treasury yield was, for the April 8th, it says their Treasury yield for a 30-year bond was 2.93%. So that's much more higher than 0.69%. So that's why most local banks tend not to subscribe because of that, because I can take my money and get 2.93% in the United States as opposed to buying a bond that gives me only 0.69%, to make it simple. It says the subscription is until Friday, May 3rd, so that's gone already, 2019, 10 a.m. through local foreign exchange banks. But like I said, most local foreign exchange banks do not typically subscribe to those bonds because of its low yield. Then there was another article I was reading on from April 18th. It says that Swobo fears bankruptcy due to lump sum system. So that was the headliner. That's something definitely you need to pay attention to. It says that Phillipsburg, according to the School Board of the Secondary Education, SWOBA, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, is seriously at the fault where it concerns the financing of secondary education, as the remuneration granted to SWOBA does not cover the costs so far. So that was an interesting article. I did saw another article where the minister responded with saying that okay, that's fine, but the extra funds or whatever was not properly substantiated. The money that was needed was not properly substantiated. So it's nice to say that you needed more money, but you have to properly substantiate it with facts and figures. Maybe that was done, I'm not sure, but the other article was claiming that that was not properly done. So indeed there needs to be a sit down to rectify, because bankruptcy is not a good thing, and especially when it comes to school, because first of all, the children will suffer, and secondly, we have something called compulsory education. So I would not know how that would work if children are not in school, because you have so-called public public education, or basically mandatory education, so to speak. So if you have a bankruptcy with a school and children can't go to school, you will have a issue, I would assume. Then there was an article talking about changes to laws being made to combat the listing as money laundering jurisdiction. That was on page number 3 of the Daily Herald of April 18th. What was interesting, I'm not going to go read the whole thing, but what was interesting in this article, it says that the U.S. even added itself to the list of major money laundering jurisdictions, along with the United Kingdom, Spain, and the Netherlands, all 3 founding members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So even the founders of this so-called combatant of money laundering, etc., is putting themselves on this list, which is interesting. At least you're showing faith in not being not showing hypocrisy, I would say. So that's a good thing, I'm assuming, because we all know that Delaware is not money laundering, but a tax haven, to be honest. So, and Delaware is in the United States. Then there was another article talking about TIAT Inspectorate stands by price observation at Carrefour. This was on page number 5 of April 18th, Daily Herald. Seems to be some issue where there was comparison of meats, and apparently Carrefour blatantly said that the government of St. Martin was wrong, and the ministry stuck by their guns and said nope, it was correct what we reported. So I guess it has to probably do with the high prices, a high price situation going on there. So that was an interesting one that I was didn't get to finish read, but I started to read it. Still trying to catch up on some news. Then there was a lottery. The lottery bank ruling stands. So look at the lottery lost the cases, which is strange to me, because now you're gonna have situations where I'm a business, I got approved by government to have a lottery, but now I can't have a bank account. I have to try to find an alternative for to some place to put money in to pay bills or whatever with my bank account. So I have to find another solution. And what the solution would be? Well, hold cash. And when you hold cash, now they're gonna say, oh, you're not abiding by money laundering or whatever case. So it's gonna be an interesting situation to see how this will be rectified. Especially if you're gonna continue giving types of businesses the lottery licenses, etc., etc. So one of the solutions would be, of course, is not the solution, but for example, I know in Canada they have a lottery, but it's a government lottery actually. So it's when you buy into that, you're helping the government make money. At the same time, the government oversees that, so it's a whole different ball game than having individuals do it. But of course, we have a number of individuals that have a license already, so not too sure how that would play out. Then there was I saw an article, not an article, but an advertisement. Not going to say the bank's name, of course, but it says that you have a unique mortgage offer, a fixed interest rate of 4.85% for the first 4 years, and free notary costs up to 2,000 guilders, free appraisal report up to 250 guilders, possible repayment period of up to 35 years, and a favorable insurance package. So that was advertisement from a particular bank on the island, and for 4.85% for the first 4 years, and then I guess after that it probably goes up to the normal rate of maybe 6 point something or 5.99%, I guess, I'm not sure. So that's something maybe you can check out. Again, I can't say the name. They're not advertising with us, so I can't mention the name. Then there was an interesting, that the banks most of the time just publish their financial, which is good. You can see how much you have been influencing the bank to make millions. So I think there was the financial statement, consolidated financial statement of the Maduro and Curios Bank NV, which Venezuelan Bank is a part of. And if you look at their consolidated financial statement on page number 34 of the April 18th Daily Herald, I'm seeing here that interest income only grew by 1%. So it was in 2017, it was 310,815. That's in millions, of course. So let's say 311 million guilders, and then it grew by 1% to 313. Let's say round up to 314 million guilders. However, the interest expense dropped by 24.5%. So in 2017, the interest expense was 21.4 million guilders, and it dropped to 16. No, I'm saying it wrong. These are big numbers, huh? So it's 21,403, but that's in thousands, and then it dropped to 16,157 guilders. That's in thousands again. So with a drop of 24.5%. What that basically means is this: is the bank takes your deposits, give you some interest income, and that interest income for you is the interest expense for them. And so their interest income only rose by 1%, but they were still able to make a killing by reducing the interest that you would have get on your savings by 24.5%. So of course, even though the interest income rose by 1%, of course they still made a killing. And that's pretty sad, to be honest, because it's kind of expensive to have money in a savings account or money in the bank in general, because it costs you more technically to have your money sitting in the bank, and you can see here they are benefiting tremendously off of your money, and by reducing that money you could have got by 24.5%. That's major. Then you also had in the same newspaper the consolidated financial highlights from Royal Bank of Canada. So that's something definitely you should gauge. It seems that, of course, that Maduro's Careers is a much bigger bank and is doing a bit better than RBC, a lot better than RBC, to be honest. But that's something you can also look up in that Daily Herald. Interesting one was on April 20th of the Daily Herald that the policyholders was awarded more than EC 1.4 million. In Port of Spain, Trinidad, the Caribbean Court of Justice on Thursday ordered the judicial manager of Kiko International Life Insurance Limited to recognize and pay a debt of over EC 1.4 million US, 1.4 million EC, which was US 518,025, to two brothers who invested in several executive premium annuity policies to fund their retirement. So it looks like this Kiko went bankrupt or something. And in the future, this is one of the things we have to really pay attention to. A lot of things is changing, and you need to realize that a lot of stuff we have to try relying on your own, because in the future, you gonna have to determine if you want someone to determine your future to some extent. Because when you come knocking on doors in the future for what is supposed to be entitled to you, and they tell you, hey, we don't have it, what then? What will you do then? So a lot of stuff you have to start taking into your own hands. I saw Lenny Kravitz did a beautiful thing. He bought land in Brazil, huge set of land, and he's basically have his own farm going there. He eats his own ground food from the farm. He have a load of cows on his land that graze the ground for him. It was definitely an eye-opener, because you've seen that stars and a lot of wealthy individuals are, going back to nature, while we are sticking with this futuristic, food is killing us. Almost everything in the food is killing us. But these guys have the money to go out and do, and not necessarily have the money, because if you look at Brazil in comparison to buying that same type of property in the States, it probably was, a steal of a deal down in Brazil. Then on the government info page, it talks about the permits department of the Ministry of Public Housing, Spatial Planning. They talk about the new building. There's a building permit was issued, and you can actually review that and make your person who may be affected by the plan development have until 20th of May 2019. So you still have some time to complain. This is the property in Great Bay. They were building the hotels or whatever, but I don't think anyone will object to that, I'm assuming, because its so-called jobs will be provided, I'm assuming. Interesting article. I'll probably end it now before I get into the videos, because time is of the essence. I saw an interesting article by Robbie Ferron, and it was in the Daily Herald of Saturday, April 20th. He mentions here that it is confusing On the one hand, the Dutch government offers a very considerable sum of money for reconstruction post-hurricane, but at the same time, the delivery of the benefits is so complex that much unnecessary suffering takes place. It leads to accusations of all sorts, including the claim that the funds are really intended to manipulate local politics. And I tend to be coming to that same conclusion. In order to understand some parts of this enigma, it is necessary to understand the long history of development aid given by the Dutch. This history in many parts of the world has proven that aid funds generally do not achieve their targets. A significant community with a long experience and some retained traumas is employed to try to improve this and improve effectiveness. This community is guided by the political pressures in the Netherlands, where past development aid has been heavily criticized, often for good reasons. So Martin has not been successful in painting a good picture of itself in the Netherlands, and extensive press material relating to administrative missteps, mainly corruption, has got substantial attention. The result has been the choice of specialized third party to administer the funds. The World Bank covers a wide range of services that are supported by 189 member countries. Its typical activities involve trying to ensure that development efforts are more effective than they would be. In many cases, this results in them making recommendations that are not in the interests of parties in power or with popular movements. In many cases, criticism has been justified and improvements made. In many cases, criticism of the World Bank has been made by parties resisting transparency and democratization. There is a general consensus that increased bureaucratization is one of the greatest downsides of the World Bank. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is, of course, well known. We are how much months further? 19 months or so further, and we are still not moving as intended or planned. Nonetheless, what I want to talk about is the food security aspect. We mentioned a lot about going independent. The problem with independence is you have to have a number of things in place, and to me one of them has to do with food security. And if you don't have food security, to me, then talking about independence, it becomes difficult. One of the things I heard on Facebook, we had a little clash on Facebook where they were saying, Holland, there was a remark made that Holland better watch out in the case, that if something happens to one of the politicians. And I made a joke. It was a joke. It said, Holland have F-16s. F-16s fighter jets. So what do we have? So I don't know if you can, win a fight with Holland that easy. But nonetheless, that was a little joke I made about it. But nonetheless, I want to bring up now one of the videos talking about food security. And then in addition to that, I'll bring another video that kind of clashes what that lady says, and so you can draw your own opinion.
Can you remember what life was like for you when you were 9 years old? You were likely going through puberty, and you were more concerned with looking good and avoiding looking bad. For me, the year was 1992. I was entering the 4th grade, and I went to Heflin Elementary School in Houston, Texas. For me, I was more concerned about rushing home to chat my friends up on the phone, which was a landline, or jumping in front of the tube to watch my favorite music videos on MTV. Or if you were really anything like me, you like to collect a lot of things. I mean, like bookmarks, posters, pins of New Kids on the Block. Those were the good old days, right? You were only 9. What did you really have to worry about? You didn't have to worry about paying bills, right? You had to just worry about that really cute guy in class and if he really liked you back. Or failing your math test. There weren't too many worries. Things were a little different for me. When I was 9, my mother worked as a draftsman at the phone company. And I can remember every morning she would wake me up to the smell of bacon, eggs, toast, and Folgers coffee. It was the best part of waking up. I can remember every night she cooked us a hot meal. And on Wednesday nights, she let me set the menu. Life was good back then. And then things began to change. My mom and I spent less time at home, where she'd go on our little vacations, and I'd spend time at my aunt and uncle's. But it was okay, it was kind of like slumber parties. And then we had to move. We moved from a 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-bedroom apartment, just nearly a mile up from where we lived. I had to sell my Care Bears canopy bed, my Mickey Mouse stove, and my Snoopy snow cone machine. Well, okay, Snoopy had to go because I was getting syrup all over the kitchen and Mom wasn't having it. Mom was dying. My mother had developed a rare disease that the doctors didn't know what it was. She went from having a great job to being unemployed, single, sick, nearly homeless, and with a 9-year-old to raise. My mother was brave, she was resilient, but that still didn't negate the feeling that I felt when she'd asked me to go to the store to pick up milk, eggs, bread, peanut butter, rice, and beans. And going to the store, when I'd walk into Mr. Vick's place, it smelled like fresh bread and roach spray. As I'd gather groceries into my cart, and I'd wait in line to check out, if there were any other patrons in line, I'd ensure that they'd go in front of me because I didn't want them to see me paying with food stamps. I mean, this was in the early 90s, so you had the bright, colorful paper books, right? You didn't have the EBT cards that can be mistaken for debit cards today. I was embarrassed, and I didn't want anyone to know. But Mr. Vick knew. Or when my mother would ask me to go to the church pantry with her because she was too weak to bring the food back on her own. She would open her grocery stack, and as she was stacking and piling the food into our bag, I would stand back and survey the room to see who I recognized, because I didn't want anyone from church to know that we came here to get our food. I was humiliated. Or even at school in the lunch line, as I had my food, I would cross my fingers that a classmate wouldn't be standing in front of me or behind me because I didn't want them seeing me pass along that little red ticket to the lunch lady. Or from elementary and middle school, and then in high school, it went to that 4-digit pin that I'd whisper to the lunch lady. You see, I was afraid that my classmates would judge me and make fun of me to no end because I wasn't like them. We couldn't even afford food. And so there were good days where there were hamburger Mondays and cheesy pizza Fridays that really carried the day because it meant that it was something other than beans. I mean, my mom was a delightful cook, but I really couldn't tell because we had beans almost every night. We had black beans, white beans, pinto beans, lima beans, red beans, 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 beans. By the time I graduated from high school, I didn't care if I ever ate a bean another day in my life. I was only 9 years old. From the age of 9 to the age of 18, I've blocked out that entire period of my life. I made up that I wasn't good enough, I didn't belong, and something wasn't right here. And as a result, I've developed my entire identity based on that. I felt like it wasn't right for me to feel that way as a 9-year-old, that I wasn't good enough and that I didn't fit in. But now as an adult, I realize that there was nothing to be ashamed of, because there are 24 million Americans that suffer from not having enough food to eat. That's 1 in 7 Americans. And in this city and in Milwaukee, it's 1 in 4 where children like me are present. And so I stand before you sharing my story in hopes that my narrative will change the narrative. I now work as an executive for Wisconsin's largest food bank. And I see the many faces of hunger every day through the hundreds of thousands of people that we're able to feed with dignity and compassion. I see that urban hunger is a lot like suburban and rural. The geography may be the same, but the people are a lot alike. Like the case of Nikki, the young girl who steals a little extra from the lunchroom to ensure that her little brother and sister have something to eat at night. Or Margot, the single mother who has to choose between rent and electricity or food on the table for her babies. Or Gary, who has degrees on top of degrees that just so happen to lose his job, and now he's trying to figure out, how am I going to put food on the table? Or Maria, who lives in a senior community, who's on a fixed income, and who's trying to balance her prescriptive drugs and the rising cost of groceries. And finally, Jose. Jose seemingly could never really keep a job, but he was able to pick up odd and end gigs here and still couldn't scrape up a living wage. It's this narrative that Nikki, Margot, Gary, Maria, and Jose, as if it's their fault that they're hungry, that they're the weaklings of society, and that it's something that they did to put themselves in a situation that keeps us stuck. I mean, but do you even know what I mean when I say hunger, right? You may have fasted for your personal reasons or religious reasons, right? And maybe your mind wasn't right while you're going through the process, so you got really hungry and angry at the same time. I like to call that hangry, right? But that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? That doesn't even get you close to what I talk about when I'm referring to hunger. Hunger is scary. Hunger is a basic human need. And without it, you do some pretty unpredictable things. When you don't eat, you can't think. When you don't eat, you can't function. And when you don't eat, you can't live. So the current status quo is that it's them versus us, as if they need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. But even that experience that you feel of hunger when you haven't eaten in a long time, just imagine that coupled by the feeling of anxiety of not knowing when you'll ever be able to eat again. And you'll begin to do irrational things. And so you don't tell someone to pick themselves up by their bootstraps who doesn't even have boots in the first place. We have to change the narrative. We've been treating people as if they're transactions. Pounds in and pounds out. Pounds before people. Statistics before people. People are not numbers. People are beings that have feelings that are real, and it is real complex. We've been operating in silos, as if this is my territory, so stay back. I work in food, so let me just focus on the number of people I can feed, regardless of the nutritional value, regardless of if it affects any of their other health elements. Or, I work in education, so I'm only going to focus on the number of children I'm able to push out this door, regardless on if they're prepared or if they're ready for another phase in their life. Or, I work in economic development, so I'm going to focus on the number of people that I get jobs for, regardless on the working conditions or if they're living wage. We continue by staying in these silos to perpetuate this narrative, and it's not okay. It's time that we change the narrative, and I invite you to lean in on how to do that. One, we first have to recognize that the issue of hunger is complex. People don't just wake up one day and become hungry. It's a system that has them hungry. In the case of Margot, the single mother who's choosing between her rent and electricity, she lost her job. She went through a period of not being able to access food stamps. She didn't know where the food pantry was, so here she is, just with her children, trying to figure it all out. That's how a lot of people's situations are. We have to look at it from the root cause of it. And what I mean by that is that we have to be willing, as caretakers of the community, to look upstream and to consider what's having these people be hungry. And I look at there being 4 core pillars to household stability. It's food, health, housing, and employment. If you don't have food, you can't think and function. If you don't have housing, you can't expect someone to show up on the job and give 100%. If you don't have health care, you can't really expect someone to perform at their peak. And if you're not employed, you can't expect to bring in an income and for the rest of your house to be stabilized. So an example of this is a picture of household instability. If someone doesn't have housing, and if these were all like spokes on a wheel, if one of those spokes are gone, that car isn't moving. It's disabled. And so that's how we've been treating people in America. As if, why can't you just pick yourself up by your bootstraps? Well, they can't. As organizations and as stewards of the community, we have to start working in concert with one another. As I mentioned, a lot of nonprofits do a great job of operating in silos, and it's not just nonprofits, it's several organizations as well. And in working in concert, what I mean by that is co-authoring agendas for the quality of life for our entire community. And saying that I work really well in food and this is what I can contribute. Or I work really well in healthcare and this is what I contribute. In housing, in unemployment, in education. And being able in this massive puzzle to put down our puzzle piece and step back and consider, how does my piece affect the entire picture? That's what I mean by working in concert. It's not about the lack. It's about looking at the bigger picture and seeing the abundance of opportunity. We then have to be unapologetic about advocating on the public's behalf. It is with us that the public entrusts, as nonprofit leaders, as government officials, to keep the public in mind. I'm not passing any judgment, but I'll tell you what we should do. And in keeping the public in mind, we have to put a stake in the ground. We have to go from feeding the hungry to solving hunger. We have to be willing to put ourselves out of business to ensure that the health of the public is our first priority. And who knows, once we finish solving hunger, we can go from feeding America to nurturing America. How about that? And when we do that, new possibilities arise. Possibilities such as food banks working with school districts to provide pop-up school pantries, where on a monthly basis, schools get provided with food for the families and their students that attend that school to ensure they have a consistent flow of healthy and safe food. Or healthcare providers working with food pantries to provide diabetic-friendly food pantries to ensure that those facing hunger don't also lose their health because they're not eating to live. Or the farmers markets who start allowing the use of EBT, food stamps, so that all people can enjoy the access to healthy and safe food. So it's when we begin to work in concert with one another that anything becomes possible. And so I share my story with you in hopes of changing the narrative. And I never have considered myself a public health professional. You know, I've done a lot of things in the community, but I've never had formal training. But what I've come to discover is that by me working and advocating on behalf of the public's health and well-being, that in fact, I was operating in public health. And so, you all may be listening to this, and you may be thinking, that's interesting, right? And so I don't want you to leave here and just fire off a text, #HungerSucks, and then 5 seconds later, lean over to your neighbor and say, where are we eating after this? I want you to lean in just a little bit closer. And I want you to go back to your communities, and I want you to realign your personal mission to why you do what you do, and make it worth your life. I want you to dig deep and have your why be so big it doesn't matter how you do it. or how long it takes. Next, I want you to re-engineer how you do things in your places of operation. By re-engineering, I mean to begin to massage and to reshape how you're operating, and to ensure that you're addressing the root cause and that you're doing it as effectively and as nimbly as possible. And finally, I want you to reframe the conversation in every space that you walk into so that hunger is no longer on the table and solving hunger is. So I invite you to join me in this mission to change the narrative, because together we can, and together we can change the world. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, so that was an interesting one. Food insecurity is a public health concern. All we hear about, though, is about national health insurance and blah, blah, blah. However, food insecurity is a problem, is a public health concern, or should be a public health concern. By the way, what a beautiful woman. I must say she's very beautiful. And I like what it is she's doing. Then it says here, she says four things: food, housing, healthcare, and employment are key things. She had it in the chart. Of course, this is part of Maslow's pyramid as well. Anyone knows the Maslow's theory also mentions these same things in order to make the society stable. And I like what she said when she says from feeding to nurturing. Before I go to the last video, it says, I like to use these two quotes: no one can win a war individually. So there's a lot of wars out there, and we will never be able to win them if you want to do it individually. And if you want peace, prepare for war. So the two are related. One, no one can win a war individually. And if you want peace, prepare for war. So just ponder on those two quotes, and then you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Now the next one is why food won't solve the problem of hunger. So this is somebody's contrasting to some extent what she's saying. And so you can do both of them and then form your own opinion. So here we go to why food won't solve the problem of hunger.
For the last 40 years, we've been sold a lie about how to solve hunger. It's the kind of deception that sounds so right, so convincing, that we don't even ask questions. We've been told, and far too many of us believe, that handing out food to poor, struggling people will fill their need and end their hunger. Now, it's true that in an emergency like the fires that ravaged Fort McMurray, or during war, or the myriad of natural disasters that rock our world with regularity, we need to give them food. We need to hand food to them. Desperate people in desperate straits need food right away. And indeed, the hunger that I've seen working in low-income communities over the last 20 years is a crisis. 4 million of our fellow citizens, 4 million of them, don't know where their next meal is going to come from. 1 in 7 people in the U.S. don't get enough to eat on a daily basis. But I want to be very, very clear. This is a crisis of a different, long-standing order, and we've been throwing food at it for a very long time. We build new food banks and expand the ones we already have. And while these frontline programs, these food pantries, are doing their best, resources are minimal, space too often dreary and inadequate, and they rely heavily on highly processed corporate leftovers. Meanwhile, our politicians campaign on giving tax credits to these companies. We establish walkathons to raise food. We check out hunger at the grocery store. We've created an entire ecosystem of food charity. And it is so pervasive, it makes us feel like we've done our part, makes us think the problem is solved. And yet nothing, absolutely nothing, could be further from the truth. The numbers of people unable to put food on their table continues to grow at an alarming rate. Food bank users are some of the unhealthiest people in our country, battling diabetes and other diet-related illnesses. It's become so pervasive that we think that we can't do anything but hand them food. My sense of this issue is that we have to find a way to recognize that people who are struggling, they aren't struggling because they don't have enough to eat. They're struggling because of low minimum wages, inadequate social assistance rates. These are the issues that are at the heart of why people can't put food on their table. Now, I have a friend named Jen Popendiek. She's one of my food movement heroes. And she always said that the way we frame a problem determines the kind of solutions that we get. So if we say that hunger is about a lack of food, then the answer is obvious. Get those people something to eat. But if we ask, what is really at the root of hunger? We discover that the answer is far more complicated and less easy to respond to. That's because at the root of hunger is poverty. At the root of hunger is the 23% drop in income for the lowest earning Canadians. It's in the U.S. federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. In other words, it's impossible for people to afford to both eat and live with health and dignity. Anyone can see that we're not going to solve such persistent problems with donations of canned peas and corn, no matter how well-meaning. The solution lies elsewhere. I have a friend named Glenn who's in the audience today. He's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. He grew up in a family that didn't value education, and he had quit school by grade 9. By then, he was already an alcoholic. He hit rock bottom at 23. He was so sick, he nearly died. But Glenn was one of the lucky ones. He managed to beat drinking and get his life back on track. He worked hard on a fishing trawler in Holland. He worked as a groom at a racetrack, in maintenance at a university. Eventually, he ended up out west, where he created a very successful landscaping business with a number of employees. He had a longtime girlfriend, a nice house, a bunch of cars. Things were great until they weren't. The army base that was critical to his income closed, and his business never recovered. His relationship fell apart, and he lost everything. Glenn ended up moving back to Toronto, and he found that the only place he could afford was a bed-bug-infested rooming house. He was hungry, depressed, his sense of self-worth completely battered. I've seen this over and over in the community food centers that we're building across the country. People come for the food, but real change happens in their lives because of the connections they forge. Growing food in our gardens, cooking together in our kitchens, sharing a meal in our dining rooms, volunteering in our after-school programs. The people that walk through our doors are hungry, but even more, they're lonely, disenfranchised, silenced. They're often without hope. You know, hope sounds like such a soft thing, an intangible. It's something you can't measure or put on a spreadsheet. And yet such soft things like hope and its sisters, dignity, self-worth, and connection, lie at the very heart of both individual and societal change. Glenn got more and more involved at our center, joining the civic engagement side of our work, learning how to speak to the media and politicians about lived experience, how to organize community meetings, and advocate effectively. It was a powerful learning process, revelatory for Glenn and others to be able to speak to people living in similar circumstances and to acknowledge that their poverty was not their fault. It wasn't a matter of personal choice or poor budgeting. recognizing that their poverty was part of a larger system of inequality, a system that isn't working in their favor, made them see themselves differently. Together, they began to feel that they could change not just their own lives, but the lives of other people living in their community. And that's exactly what they did. I remember Glenn and the civic engagement crew gathered with signs, drums, and a megaphone to march together to the office of our local politician. They felt he needed to hear how impossible it was for them to make ends meet before they went on to a larger demonstration at the legislature. When the crowd got to his office, they chanted and sang before handing Glenn the megaphone. At first, he hesitated and then seemed to grow taller and more certain of himself. He raised the megaphone to his lips and he spoke forcefully. "I was hungry yesterday," he said, "and I'm hungry today, and the way this government treats us, I'm going to be hungry tomorrow." It was a brilliant, moving moment of clarity. There on the street, everyone understood the truth about hunger. It was clear that a single meal or 100 single meals will never solve the hunger crisis. What's needed is not charity, but solidarity. We need to cultivate this sense of community and belonging that I've been speaking about, but not stop there. We need to take the essential next step, translating our collective wealth into such things as affordable childcare, subsidized housing, and perhaps one day, a basic income guarantee. These are the public policies that have been shown to diminish poverty and inequality. These are the supports that emerge from a society that understands itself as connected. And it's not just anti-poverty activists and low-income community members, but all of us who have a role to play in creating this more inclusive and fair society. And you know what? It starts by taking very small steps in your community. If you have a kid, join your school council. If you want to live in a welcoming and diverse neighborhood, get involved in your neighborhood association. Volunteer at a local organization that is doing work that you care about. And then, just like Glenn did, try to link these local efforts with larger systemic change. Turn that school experience into pushing for equitable funding for all schools. Champion the creation of affordable housing, not just in your own backyard, but across the city. Don't be a bystander. It's only by operating in this more public sphere. You need to operate in this public sphere. It's only by operating there that we'll be able to make change. That's the place you have to be, is in the public sphere. I had tea with Glenn not so long ago. After that day at the politician's office, he got a full-time job with good benefits. He started to take photography courses and pursued his passion for art. He's retired now and unfortunately struggles with some very serious health issues. But he's got a clean, safe apartment. The Volunteer of the Year award from his years at the Community Food Center is displayed proudly on his wall. He continues to be engaged in his neighborhood. He's built a community of caring around himself. It's just the kind of person he is. Actually, I believe it's the kind of people we all are. We can't afford to forget that we're all connected. For it's this sense of community that is at the core of forging a society where we can all thrive and where we can all have a dignified seat at the table. Thank you.
Yes, so you see here, he took a slightly different approach to the food issue. I bring up this food security issue because I'm foreseeing it is going to be a huge problem in the future. And so it may seem trivial now, but when you analyze the trends and what's happening globally, etc., it's going to be a huge problem, I think, in the future. So we should try to preempt stuff. And I notice we tend not to do that as as a community, we wait until things happen and then we react. But because of the food situation, I don't think is something that we should wait to react. We should be proactive, and something we should definitely take into our own hands to try to get tap into this food security aspect ASAP. So again, I want to thank you for listening. You're listening for the Love of Money talk show with your host Emilio KALMERA, and I'll be again here next week to give you another informative program. So bye bye for now. Money, 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 money.